Today's lesson is I can convert between fractions, decimals, and percents. Again, a review of what you did in elementary school. So let's try to get all that information back into your head so that you can use it. All right, so section 1.3, so the third major lesson. So what we're going to do is we have a couple different things. First one we're going to work on is these two. So first of all, fractions to decimals. It's actually quite easy. In order to change a fraction, such as 5/9, into a decimal, you actually divide the numerator by the denominator. In mathematics, this fraction sign that's in the middle actually really means dividing. So that means the same thing when we translate it, 5 divided by 9, 5/9. So we can use it interchangeably back and forth. So you literally would bring up your calculator, and I'm just going to use a graphing one just because I can bring it up on the screen for us. So if I do 5 divided by 9, and I end up with decimal 55555, and notice it ends with a 6. Actually, the last number isn't a 6, it's just my calculator ran out of digits, so it rounded up. So really this is decimal 5 repeating. So that's my answer, and so that's what I would put down. Okay, so very easy to change that. Okay, the next thing I want to do is decimals to percents. Now remember, percent always means out of 100. So if I have a decimal and I want to change it to percent, all I have to do is take that number and multiply it by 100. So if I take this number and multiply it by 100, I end up with 25%. Okay, so if I'm in percent, make sure you use the percent sign. So far, so good, right? So let's take a look at the next ones. Okay, the next one is actually pretty easy as well, and it deals with percent to a decimal. Now you're saying, hey, that's already a decimal. You're right, it's actually a decimal percent. So when I have a decimal percent, or if I have any percent, I need to divide it by 100. So when I want to make a percent from a decimal, I multiply. When I have a percent, I'm going to divide. Now, some of the reasons why you can think about this as well has to do with the fact that percent is out of 100, so this would be decimal 5 over 100. And if you remember when we talked about fractions to decimals, what did we do? Well, we actually took our calculator and went 0.5 divided by 100. Okay, so it works looking at it as a fraction to a decimal. Now, I would never write a decimal over in a fraction. Okay, so that would be very poor form if I left an answer that way. I could write it down and then actually make my calculator do it, and that's all right as well. So if you want, if you're not sure what your answer would be, you could go 0.5 divided by 100, and you would see that you have decimal 0.005 as your answer. Now in mathematics as well, notice that I've put a 0 in front of my decimal place. Okay, that would be proper form. Okay, so if you don't do it, it's not the end of the world. However, we would prefer you put a 0 decimal, 0.005. All right, the next one is a little bit trickier, and so I'm going to put a star beside it because it's the one that if you're going to have difficulty with, it's probably this one. Now with this one, what we're doing is the numbers after the decimal will be the same number of zeros used in the denominator. Okay, the numbers after the decimal. Well, here's my decimal place right here. How many numbers do I have? Sorry about that, I didn't want to star. How many numbers do I have after it? I have 1. So that means on the bottom, I am going to have 1 0. So I'm going to have 10 on the bottom, and I'm going to replace the decimal 2 with just the number 2. Okay, so the number of decimals places after the decimal is the number of zeros in my denominator. Now this isn't in lowest terms because 2 will go into both the 2 and the 10. So to finish this question up, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So my final answer there is 1/5. So let's try the next one. So we're going to put 35 on the top, and on the bottom we're going to put how many zeros? Here's my decimal place, 1, 2. So I should have 2 zeros on the bottom, followed by a 1. So I end up with 35 over 100. Again, that is not in lowest terms because 5 will go into both of those. 5 goes into 35 7 times, and 5 goes into 120 times. Next one, notice they've started to throw a whole lot of zeros into us. Well, on the top of my fraction, I'm going to put 406. I'm not going to put the 0 that's already there because every single number would have a 0 in front of it. So we just don't do that. So I'd have 406 on the top, and then my denominator would have to have, let's take a look here, it would have to have 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros on the bottom, followed by a 1. There we go. So we have 4 zeros followed by with 1. Now, again, this isn't in lowest terms. I can see that both of these are even numbers, so I know at least 2 goes into both of them. So let's try that to make our number smaller. 2 goes into 406 203 times, and it goes into 10,000 5,000 times. Okay, and again, you would attempt to reduce further if you could, and I don't think we can, so that one's finished. Okay, so let's take a look. So all of these are things, review of what you should have done in elementary school. So this is complete review. Now, what kind of question would you be asked on a test? Well, you would be asked a question such as the following, determining the missing values. Okay, so this would be a test type question. Here's our happy face. So you know when you go to study that you're looking for any question that has a happy face because I've told you that's what you're going to have. Okay, so sometimes they've given us fractions, sometimes they've given us a decimal, and sometimes they've given us a percent. Okay, so let's start with the first one, 2/3. I'm supposed to change it to a decimal. So you can either go back and see, I divide the numerator by the denominator. So again, I could bring up my calculator and go 2 divided by 3. And what you would end up with is decimal 6 repeating. So we would write down decimal 6 repeating. Now to change that to a percent, well, if I just use decimal 6, that would be 60%. But it actually is larger than that. Okay, usually this decimal here, that means that there's a whole bunch of 6's there. So if I'm going to use my calculator, what I could do is I could use this that I have here. Or I could just do a few 6's, okay, then multiply it by 100, and you could see that you end up with 66 decimal, and we'll go to 1 decimal place here. This 6 here is going to make this 6 turn to a 7. So I end up with 66.7%. Okay, so we see that on the calculator. So this second 6 after the decimal place causes the first 6 to go to a 7. Let's look at 7/5 next. Okay, so the first thing I would do is I take out my calculator again, and I would go 7 divided by 5. And when I do 7 divided by 5, I end up with 1.4. So again, put down 1.4 as my answer. Now to change that to a percent, I multiply by 100. 1.4 times 100 would be 140%. So you can have a number larger than 100 for a percent for an answer. Now let's take a look at decimals now. What happens if they give us decimals? Well, again, it's pretty easy to change it to percent because I would multiply them by 100. If I multiply 0.35 by 100, I would get 35%. Okay, now my problem is how do I change these so that they are a fraction? Well, I can do it a couple different ways. I could take the percent and put it out of 100 and go 35 over 100, which I could do. Or I could take, like we looked at our last examples with the star, I could take 35 and put it over 100. Oh, I just said the same thing if it was a percent. So you can do it this way as well. So you'll get the same answer no matter which way you do it, if you've done it mathematically correct. So I could put 35 over how many zeros? 1, 2. Or I could put 35 over 100 because that's what percent is. Now when I do that, we already know that that's not in lowest terms. We actually know it's 7/20ths. Okay, the next question, change decimal 245 into a percent. Okay, again, multiply it by 100, so we end up with 24.5%. Now we want to change it to a fraction. Now in this case, because I have a decimal, I'm going to use counting the number of zeros I need in the denominator. So I need 1, 2, 3. So I need 3 zeros, and on the top I have 245. Again, it's not in reduced form. Actually, let's see what will go into both of those. I think a 5 definitely would. And sorry, no, I don't need some more antivirus software. All right, let's take a look. So we'll bring up our calculator just to make sure. So we have 245, and we want to divide it by 5, and we get 49. And if we take 1,000 and divide it by 5, we end up with 200. So let's write that down as our next. And again, I would try to reduce that, but actually it's in reduced form. Now, sometimes they give it to you as a percent. If they give it to you as percent, remember percent to decimal, you divide by 100. You're saying it's already a decimal. I know, it's a decimal percent. It's all right. We need to get rid of the percent sign, so divide by 100. When I take this number, divide by 100, I end up with 0.125. Now I'm going to change that to a fraction. Again, I have 1, 2, 3 zeros on the bottom of my denominator, and on the top I'm going to have 125. Again, it's not in reduced form. I know 5 will go into those. 25 should go into both of those, but I think the largest number will be 125. So let's see, 1,000 divided by 125 equals 8. So I know it's going to reduce to 1/8. And the last question. So decimal 0.005%. So we have a decimal percent. To get rid of the percent sign, I multiply by 100. Now, if you get confused by the number of decimals and zeros, you can always take your calculator if you so need in order to figure it out. Okay, so that would be 0.8. Oops, what did I do? Oh, sorry, I did the wrong thing. Decimal 0.005 divided by 100. I keep hitting the wrong button there. Sorry about that. I know what the answer is, but decimal 0.005. There we go. Divided by 100. So I end up with something that you're looking at saying, I have no idea what that is. Oh, I know. Let's try it again. Decimal 0.005 divided by 100. And my calculator keeps giving me the same thing. So what does that mean? Well, what's happened here is your calculator, when you have a really small number, goes into what it's called scientific notation. So if you ever get something funny like this, or sometimes it'll say times 10 to the -5, it means it's giving you a very, very small number. So I'm going to use a different method. So the different method I'm going to use is I'm going to move my decimal place over 2 places, 1, 2. And when I do that, I end up with quite a few zeros. Now when I go to figure out it as a fraction, I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 zeros on the bottom and 5 on the top. Again, not reduced to lowest terms, so 5 goes into both of them. Okay, so kind of a yucky number. Okay, so tomorrow you get to play with these numbers. It's so much fun.